Are you rolling?
Yes.
Today in Baking with Dr. Barlow, there will be no baking involved, and in fact, there's no sugar and no chocolate. So total departure from what we usually do. We're gonna make pesto, because when I was in the grocery store, it's suddenly basil season, and it was full of basil, which was my sign. I used to make this stuff by the gallon, but we're gonna go back to the base recipe and show you how to do it. It's super easy, and you can have it for dinner. So buy a bunch of basil, or grow a bunch of basil, and then just take the leaves off with your fingernails and wash them. And you don't have to be real picky about how much of the stem you get, but you probably don't want the buds. If there's little buds, like bigger versions of that in there, you probably don't want those because they're kind of bitter. But wash them and then make sure they get pretty dry. All right, we're gonna measure it, and you just sort of stuff it in there and pack it down. Base recipe is for 1 cup, and I'm gonna declare this 2 cups of basil, which means we'll have some left over and we can stick it in the freezer. 2 cups of basil in a food processor, along with 2 cloves of garlic sliced up, 2/3 of a cup of olive oil. Use good olive oil, but not the super good stuff because it'll overshadow the taste of the basil. We need 2/3 of a cup of pine nuts. Pine nuts, there's lots of different kinds of pine nuts with very different prices. Some of them are not even pine nuts, they just look like pine nuts. I kind of think that's what this might be, but as a rule, the more you pay, the better they taste. If they're too cheap, they probably won't taste much like pine nuts. I've also got 2 cloves of garlic now, which I sliced, 1 clove per cup of basil. And then grated Romano cheese. I used a grater that's in between the really light sort of zester that makes fluffy stuff, which is hard to measure, and not the really big coarse ones. You really want to wait and grate this when you're going to use it. If you use the pre-grated stuff, it loses flavor really quickly and it's not going to taste good. So everything except the cheese goes into the food processor. And I'm going to give a little scrape. If you have any parsley, which I do not, a couple sprigs of that will help keep the color really green. And I'm also going to add, believe it or not, after all this cheese, a tiny bit of salt. About 1/4 or 1/2 teaspoon. All right, doesn't take much. Now I'm going to put it in a bowl so that I can add the cheese. This is fairly wet and loose. You can make it a little less loose with a little less olive oil, or if you want to spread it farther, depending on what you're going to use it for, you can put even more in. And you can freeze this. You can put it in little containers with a film of olive oil over the top of it. 6 tablespoons of grated Romano. There are 16 tablespoons in a cup, so 6 tablespoons is kind of sort of 1/3 of a cup, but the truth is it doesn't really matter. So 2/3 of a cup. This is probably more like 3/4 of a cup, but, and there we go. Put it on pasta. You can put it on chicken, which is what we're going to do tonight. Okay, so I have a package of boneless, skinless chicken breasts here. I've cut up 2 of them. I'm using a boning knife, but you can use whatever knife you want as long as it's sharp. And I'm just cutting into, I don't know, what is it? 1/2 to 3/4 inch cubes. So this is just some flour. I'm gonna put, I don't know, half a teaspoon of salt in here. And some pepper. It's always worth grinding your pepper if you have a pepper mill. I'm gonna mix it up a little. And I'm gonna take it over. I've got some vegetable oil here that's hot. I'm gonna test my water with, my oil with just a little bit of water. So it's hot, it's ready. And I'm gonna run the chicken through the flour. You don't want to crowd the pan too much because they'll steam. And my tongs are dirty. If you have to wash your tongs like I just did, you definitely don't want water in them when the oil is hot like this. So ideally they're going to get a little brown all the way around like that. Okay. And we're just going to cook them all up and put them on that paper towel. So the way that you can tell whether meat is done is by texture. When it's raw, it's got sort of a squishy, thick jello texture to it. Like this one still wiggles pretty good. This one, which is smaller, it's firmed up. It's not rock hard yet, but it's firm. So that one's done. Okay, the chicken is all cooked. It's cooled a little bit. You don't want it steaming hot because you don't want it to melt the cheese in the pesto. And I'm just going to dump it all into this bowl. It's hard not to pick at it. It's really good just like this, especially if it has the right amount of salt in it, in the flour. And then I'm going to just dump some pesto on it and stir it up. It takes a little while for it to move around. And there you go. This is a great appetizer. You can put it on a plate and put a little lemon wedge near it. Room temperature is the best flavor, but you can also serve it cold. We're gonna have it tonight with some pasta that's cooking now and a salad.